Welcome to the Old Salem Legends and Lanterns Tour, October 30th, 2008. Welcome to Old Salem, a village preserved in time. Come with us as we follow Brother Ross Meacham through the streets and learn about some ghosts and almost ghosts as we walk in the night. Welcome to 909 Church Street. It was built in the late 1800s, and in the early 1900s, a widow at the age of 70 died in the house. Much later, the house was sold in 1964 to a family from New York City. They bought the house sight unseen, and when the father arrived to renovate the home, he found it had no outside doors anywhere on the door frames. He found all the doors stacked upstairs in the attic. He went around renovating and putting the doors back on, but they continued to close and slam and open and even remove themselves from the hinges. Finally, he ran from the house screaming one day, right through the screen door. He decided to bring a psychic back with him from New York, and she told him that she fixed the problem and eventually took the 70-year-old ghost back to New York City with her, and there were no problems again. When the man finally managed to talk to the former owner and ask him why the doors were in the attic, he said, "We never could stand all the slamming." This is the single sisters' house where all the unmarried women who were Moravians lived. One night there were two Moravians sisters in their room when they heard a knock and then a scream. They ran to open the door, and one of the sisters ran in, saying a large black animal with blazing red eyes had attacked her. They went out and searched but could not find anything. As she was going back into the house and about to close the door, a black creature ran into her room and under her bed. This brave sister dived under the bed and dragged the animal out. It turned out to be her cat, covered in soot with red walnuts glued to its body. And as she looked out the window, she saw two of the teenage brothers giggling and running away. Now, when the Moravians first built their village, they had a cold winter and someone died, and not knowing what else to do with the body in the middle of this frozen winter, they left him in the room in the single brother's house. Well, the room became very smelly and the whole floor was unlivable, so finally they decided to build a house for the dead called a corpse house. Unfortunately, the man who designed and built the corpse house was the first corpse laid out in the house. Eventually, the corpse house, which was built right across the street from the single sister's house, was removed to another area of town because the single sisters disliked having to look out and see the house that would be filled with the dead. Now, the Moravians have a large church called Home Moravian Church, and next to that they have a graveyard called God's Acre, and it is managed by the choir system. You were buried according to your choir. Married brothers would be buried together in the next available plot in the married brothers section. Widowed sisters would be buried in the next available plot in the widowed sisters area, and that is how you would be buried, not with your family, but with the choir or group that you belong to. Once there was a house right next to God's acre, and a young sister lived there with her family and could oversee the graveyard. One night she woke up because she heard a loud thumping noise and some other strange sounds. Running to her parents' room, she woke her father, but he sent her back to bed after investigating and seeing nothing. Finally, she woke up again, screaming, and her father, coming to her room, again could not find the source of the sound. After the third time, he decided to have everyone get up and they would all investigate. They didn't find anything, but the next day, the father went and talked with everyone in the village and discovered that a person had been buried in the Single Brothers choir section of the God's Acre, only to be discovered that after they dug his grave that he was really a widowed brother. So they had to dig his grave in the middle of the night to prepare for the funeral the next day and dig it, and that was the sounds of digging that the young sister had heard. Now just over there in the street in the intersection, we had some paranormal enthusiasts here a few weeks ago, and when we walked to the intersection, they could tell by their gauges on their machines they had brought to record paranormal phenomena that the temperature dropped only in this section. Well, according to legend, a young boy who was sledding on the back of a trolley was killed and hit by the trolley. So there may or may not be a connection to the young boy. Now let us proceed to Home Moravian Church and to the Single Brothers house down the street. Behind us is the Home Moravian Church, and right there where you're standing, did you feel it? The drop in temperature. On our right is the house upon which the glowing orbs were seen. Do you see them? Do you believe in them? I'm not so sure I don't anymore. Welcome to the Single Brothers house, where young men lived before they were married. This is the spot of the most famous ghost story in Old Salem, the Little Red Man. The first part of the house was built in 1769, and there were 16 men living there at the time. Later on in 1786, there were 60 men living there, and so they decided to build a second section. Living in the Single Brothers house at that time was Andreas Krishner from Pennsylvania. He had moved there and had trouble adjusting to life in Old Salem. He did not seem to get along with anyone. He started out as a chimney sweep, but he did the job too quickly. And then when he was told to slow down, he did it too slowly. So next he was sent to the kitchen. But again, he did not get along with the people he was working with. Finally, in the corner of the Single Brothers house on the first floor was the shoemaker's house, and he worked there and was very happy as a shoemaker. Now, when they began to build the extension on the Single Brothers house, they were digging the cellar, and they had a way of building a ramp of dirt, and they would move the dirt from the sides and up the ramp to make it easy to dig it out. And they had someone who would stand on the bank and who would watch to make sure that the sides were not caving in and would call out a warning if they would. Now Andreas was down working with the brother Dixon, and they were just about to complete a section when suddenly the bank caved in. Brother Dixon was buried to his arms, but Brother Andreas was covered completely. They finally and hurriedly dug them out, but unfortunately, Brother Andreas died from his injuries, while Brother Dixon survived. Now, later on, people would say that they would hear something down in the basement and would turn and see a man standing in a red shirt. He was a short man, and then he would disappear. They would turn their head and he would be gone. At the time of his death, Brother Andreas was wearing his red long-sleeved underwear shirt as the shirt he had taken off with his coat to dig better. And he was also a man of very short stature. Many people have seen the red man over the years, and more recently, a number of years ago, a very strict and studious and not very imaginative secretary working in the building went down into the basement late at night to finish up something and turned and saw a man she thought she recognized. Following down the hall, she realized he was not who she thought. Instead, she realized it was the little red man. Needless to say, she does not work in that building anymore, and especially not late at night. As we walk past the single brother's house, notice the two different styles of architecture and wonder, can you see maybe in the basement windows? What is that? Is it? And here you can better see the contrast between the old and the new. Many of the houses in Old Salem are still private residences. Does that mean they no longer have the ghosts, or does that mean the ghosts just live right along with them? Now Brother Meacham will show us the Bloom house. Years ago it was a print shop, and then it became a stationery store, and the print shop became a photography studio. Brother Bloom was said to be upset about these changes. Now you may remember that Brother Bloom lived years ago, and you would often hear conversations in the hallway, the people who worked there, and the doors began to stick. People would have trouble getting in and let alone out of the building, and more strange noises and floorboards squeaking, and finally people just did not want to work in the house any longer. As we walk past the Bloom house, make sure you look in the windows to see if you can see the tall, strange, gaunt man, Brother Bloom, who used to live there, because they say if you looked out of the corner of your eye, you may see him standing next to the print machine that he loved so well. And though it is not a print shop anymore, you can still see the press inside, as well as photographs of Old Salem. We will now end our tour with the Salem Tavern, built in 1784. The original one burned, and in 1791 was a place where George Washington spent 3 nights. And from this porch he addressed a crowd of hundreds. But the story I want to tell takes place in the winter. One night there was a knock on the door, and when the door was opened, a very sick man fell in. They sent for the doctor and carried him upstairs, but with all the doctor's help he died that night. Unfortunately, he had no ID upon him, and they didn't know who he was. So they buried him at the brick church, because he could not be buried in God's acre if he was not known to be a Moravian. Now, many months and weeks after the man had died, strange things began to occur in Salem Tavern. Cold spots would appear. Strange sounds would be heard. Finally, one day, a maid screamed from the second floor, and racing breathlessly down the stairs, she said to the tavern keeper that she had seen a man in the hallway, but the strangest thing was that she could see right through him. The tavern keeper accused her of falling asleep or being drunk, but he still went up to check upon her, and there he saw the ghost himself and spoke with him. And the man said that his name was McClary, and that he was from Charleston, South Carolina, and could they please send his things to his family. And so the tavern keeper, still skeptical, arranged and sent his things upon the way, finding out that yes, indeed, there was a McClary who disappeared on a trip to Salem. Now, as we end our tour, you may proceed back across the covered bridge. But beware, it is dark and late, and you never know what lurks around the corner. We hope you enjoyed this full night of historic, haunting events to enjoy. Make sure you come back again next year for one of the Legends and Lantern tours through Old Salem. Happy Halloween.